You warned me. You all warned me, and I still did it anyway. Hello there, and welcome to the Infinite Inkwell. I'm Lewis, and I'm on a journey to discover new ways to tell stories. At the moment, I'm trying to do that through a video game. I've never made a video game before, I've never written any code before, not until I've started this story. This week, I'm talking about why I've chosen to abandon C++. Over the last few weeks, I've been having a look at Godot, trying to find how I can build something in Godot. This video was meant to be how I could build a game using C++ in Godot, but that's actually been a lot harder than I anticipated. I've spent a lot of time the past few days going through YouTube tutorials, reading, and really understanding the level of complexity that's involved in just setting up C++ and Godot. It's just next level. Even looking at some of the code and how things are structured, I feel like I learned a lot about how it does and doesn't work in Godot with C++. And this was actually really interesting because I did not realize how much additional effort this would be. I know that down in the comment sections on the previous videos when I've spoken about C++, a lot of you guys have gone, "What are you doing? Why would you do that? Madman." I'm starting to understand where a lot of you guys were coming from, but I kind of wanted to have a look first. I want to go through a few points and things that I learned that I thought were really useful, actually more than anything else, and have been one of my main drivers behind the video's title, which is why I've abandoned my plans to look at C++ entirely. When it comes to complexity, I found that as I was looking through a lot of this, I actually need to mostly know the language. I need to understand a lot more of the building blocks before I can do anything meaningful within the engine. That goes back to the point that I was making before when I was looking at learning GD script in Godot, that you need the computer science piece to be able to do this. And I kind of get it with C++, because C++ isn't the native language, right? We know the native language is GD script because it was built by those guys for the platform specifically. But C++ is something that has slowly been integrated into the platform. We know that since version 4 released, it actually has become a lot easier to use C++ within the platform from what I understand, but it's still a lot of work. One of the things that I did find was that there's so much additional detail that you need to do, not just to prepare your system to be able to write C++ for Godot, but also to be able to just write code for Godot. So instead of being able to use the very simple script that you can do within Godot using GD script, you now have to write a number of kind of extra things like subclasses you're now introducing to be able to utilize it within the engine, which is kind of mad. Like, there's that extra level. You're adding so much more complexity. And from what I can see and what I've learned, a lot of that complexity is really good if you're building a really kind of complex and detailed game where you need to manage a lot of the performance. One of the things that I did find is that it did make my brain melt. I was looking at some of these tutorials and looking at the way that code was structured and just found myself just so overly confused by what was on screen, and they were explaining what it was doing and why it had to be built this way. It just made my brain melt. As a normal person who doesn't have that deep experience in computer science or code, it's somewhere between science and magic right now for me. This is not real. And it just, yeah, I found it a lot, and that contributed to my decision. In some instances where you're going to want to manage your resources, so the actual machine resources to run the game, then C++ is quite useful, but I'm not going to be doing that. This is game one for me, right? I'm not going to be touching that sort of stuff. I'm definitely not expecting it to go that way. So why would I bother? Which is, again, mirroring a lot of the sentiment that I've read in the comments and I've kind of seen online where people have gone, just don't do it. Just don't. But I wanted to do the research first. I wanted to go and see, okay, why shouldn't I do this? And I am really struggling to justify why I would. And one of the things that I did find really difficult and quite interesting in itself is that I'm building on a Mac right now. I know that's probably going to be quite controversial just by saying that. I'm using a MacBook, but a lot of the stuff that I was seeing was for Windows. That's going to be quite, it's quite hard for me to adjust to some of those things to make sure that it will work on Mac, and finding instructions to set it up for Mac is not easy. In fact, it's been a lot harder than I would have thought it would have been. So maybe I just don't do it at all. Do I just abandon it? That's where the answer is obviously yes. And I am abandoning C++. So, of course, along with being put off by using C++ entirely, there were some things that I did learn. And I think that's quite important to just register that I did learn something doing this. Where there was a lot of talk about VS Code and Visual Studio, I started to look into that a little bit more and saw a lot of the native setups you can have with Godot and how that can work, and how VS Code has native support for GitHub. So that's actually made it a lot easier, particularly for things like version control. I've not really used GitHub before, but I know you use it for creating branches off your main code, which allow you to control the different versions. So if you don't massively overwrite your code every single time, you can just break off small chunks and work on it that way. I have now set that up with VS Code, and I've created a GitHub account, so I can start to do version control that way. There's probably a better native way within Godot that I need to look into, but I have that, and that's huge. Hopefully I won't be breaking stuff and have to start again anymore, but you never know. Also, while looking into all of this, I had to set up Git on my Mac, which I actually found oddly difficult to do when I was trying to use things like Homebrew, and that didn't quite work the way I wanted to, but in the end I used Xcode, just installed that, and it sorted it all out for me. What does this mean now? Well, originally I was going to have this experiment where I used Godot and GDScript, Godot and C++, Unreal and C++, and Unreal and Blueprint. But I've got rid of the two C++ options, and I'm now just left with GDScript with Godot and Unreal's Blueprint. So I didn't think it was fair to just have those two go head to head. So I've gone back and had a think about what I want to do next, and I'm going to introduce another engine. I just want it to be more of a fair face-off than just these two. So I've decided to look at GameMaker Studio. I know I originally wrote it off for being a bespoke language, but I've kind of already done that with GDScript to a degree. So I'm bringing it back into the mix. One of the things that I liked about GameMaker Studio, looking at it when I was originally evaluating the different platforms, was the visual element to it. I quite like the way that it has these floating windows that you can have linked to each other, so you can see, oh right, this is the object and these are the events that I want to link to that object. So it becomes a little bit more visually engaging, and that's something that I really like. I think it's also going to make a lot more sense in my head as opposed to jumping between tabs, which I know I had to do a lot of in Godot. So this could be an interesting way to compare them really and understand, how do I prefer to work? So it becomes less about the technical detail of the code and more about the, is this workflow better for me? Because I hadn't considered workflow yet, and I think this could be big. Also, with GameMaker Studio, let's remember that it is actually free. Yes, there is a license which you have to pay for if you want to commercialize it on a platform that is not their own. That's fine. That's, I think, $100 forever. It's a one-off fee. So I will probably look at doing that as and when I get to that point, but I can do most of this for free. So that's fantastic. This means that my next video is actually going to be about GameMaker Studio. I've already downloaded it. I've not opened it yet, and I'm going to go and spend some time working out how it works and how I can do something in GameMaker. That's me for this week. If you like this video, then hitting that like button would be massively appreciated. That would be awesome. If you really like this video, then come on the journey. Let's see what I can do with one of these engines. We're still going through the evaluation phase. If you want to go check out some of my previous videos, I talk about the game design document, how I filled out mine, and walk you through some of the backstory there around what am I going to be building once all this evaluation piece is done. So yeah, come on the journey. It's going to be an exciting thing. I've never done this before. I don't have any coding background. This could be quite cool. And then we'll see what stories we can tell. So hit that subscribe button if you want to come on the journey. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.